In today's episode, we'll shed some light on a canvas ceiling mystery.
And later, we'll chat with Brooke Young Russell, an architectural conservator who specializes in paint analysis in historic buildings.
But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder.
And I'm Daniel Cantor.
You're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, friend, how you doing? What's going on?
I'm good. I'm really excited about the season. I was thinking the other day about how we have just been recording with some really cool people, and maybe a longer time off was a good thing, even though I'm really happy to be back.
Yeah, I think we have really, really good guests this season. Brownstone Boys were great. We have a great interview today. So season 11, it's a banger.
It is. And before we launch into today's episode, I do want to say a very, very special thank you to our season 11 sponsors, The Window Course by Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog, Sutherland Wells, Abitron, and Noonan Heritage Craftworks. We are so grateful.
Yes, thank you. You guys keep the lights on, and we are thrilled to have you.
All right, let's start with announcements. The first thing I guess I want to mention is that we are looking for listener questions this season. Over the past 10 seasons, we have covered a lot of topics.
We have. There's always more topics to cover. No question is too simple or too complicated. If we don't know the answer, we will find an expert to answer it. So keep them coming. We will take them either through the contact form on the website, truetalesfromoldhouses.com, or through voicemail, which you can also find at truetalesfromoldhouses.com.
And speaking of voicemail, whenever you have thoughts or comments about an episode, please feel free to leave your feedback using that mic icon, because we would love to hear from you. And it would be a lot of fun, I think. Don't you think, Daniel? It'd be a lot of fun to share those voicemails with the True Tales from Old Houses community.
Definitely. And I would encourage, get creative with it if you want to practice your slam poetry or your cabaret act or, whatever. Yodeling. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Should we start that part over? If you're interested in sharing your yodeling, please go to truetalesfromoldhouses.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your beautiful voices.
Yes, we would. The next announcement I have is that I just wanted to make sure that everyone heard Brad and I were able to significantly reduce the ticket prices for this summer's Wood Window Workshop at Silver Lake. Very excited about that. That new, even better ticket price is $3.99 for a single and $6.99 for a duo. And everyone who's already signed up has been refunded the difference. So great news all around.
Yeah, it's a super fun weekend. You will learn a lot. You get to hang out with me and Stacy and Brad and everyone else who's there. We're all the same kind of person. So you're going to have instant friends, and it's a great time and a great value.
I think so too. I want to say we were able to reduce those prices because we got some new sponsors, which we'll share with you. We haven't dotted all of our I's and crossed all of our T's yet, but we know that that's happening. So as soon as I can share those sponsors with you, I will. But for the new price of $3.99 single, $6.99 duo, you're still going to get 16 hours of instruction, including lead-safe education from a certified instructor. I should say a certified A+ instructor
100%.
As I ace the class.
Okay.
What did you get again? Was it a
It doesn't.
a C?
It's not relevant,
No?
Stacy.
Okay.
That's why I'm not teaching the class.
You'll also get breakfast and lunch on Saturday and Sunday, plus snacks. And Brad got some really good food for you this year. That was very important to him. He also arranged for some after-hours excursions to Letchworth State Park, or you could also go to Wildflower Farm and Micro Creamery. There will be a swag bag with a work apron, local treats, and my favorite glass cutter, which is a total game changer. Did you use that glass cutter last year?
Yes, I did. And it does work better than the one I have.
Yeah.
She knows her stuff, people.
You'll also get 2 15-minute follow-up calls with me by Zoom or whatever. So if you get stuck at home, you just call me and we'll work it out. There's also a money-back guarantee. So if you don't learn what you need to rehab your windows at home, then I am going to personally refund your money. And finally, that sort of amorphous, abstract concept of warm fuzzies. You're going to get plenty of warm fuzzies because the windows that we're restoring belong in the historic Epworth Hall. And Epworth Hall is located in the Silver Lake community. It is absolutely beloved. It's undergoing a much larger restoration, and they have a super tight budget. So we're happy to be a part of that.
And I got a solid B on my lead certification, Stacy.
No, I rudely said you got a C, right? Okay, a B student is a good
A
student. You did a
solid
fine job.
B.
A
That's like
solid B.
what, 3.5 GP? I don't know. I dropped
Something
out.
like that. Anyway, you've got nothing to lose, so please visit blakehillhouse.com to reserve your spot.
See you there.
All right, Daniel, I don't have any updates for you except that I just returned from Japan.
Wow. Yeah. How was Japan?
Well, all I'm going to say is that the jet lag is killer. I am lucky to be here. And so I'm actually going to share about that trip during the next mini-sode because I can barely keep my eyes open.
Yeah, you need some time to digest what you've experienced and also sleep.
Yeah. I was gone for 8 days and had jet lag there. I'm home. It'll take 8 days to get over the jet lag here. So I should be good to go next Monday.
So just jet lag for half a month.
No big deal.
But Japan, I mean, very cool.
I know. And I can't wait to tell you all about it.
I need one of those updates to be that you went to like one of those cat cafes. So even if you didn't do some research, so you can tell me about it.
All right. We'll see. We'll see. All right. But what have you been up to while I've been away?
Oh, gosh. I was really busy, actually. Brad came in. I really put him to work this time. Sometimes I'll be like, yeah, we'll do like a few hours and then we'll go do some fun stuff. This time I'm like, we are just working pretty much. And I actually like sent him away like an hour and a half before he was going to leave because I was like, I have to finish this whole thing. I have an entire other workday ahead of me. Like, you can stay or you can go. But it was pretty rude. But we got some important stuff done. So I'm really kind of wrapping up at the cottage. And one of the final things is basically a lap around the exterior of the house. It's been several years since it was painted. And I've done a bunch of landscaping and a bunch of just stuff in between and some projects that weren't successful. So I spent the weekend, basically, we replaced this section of fencing that I built that did not execute well. I tried to make these like mesh panels as fence panels.
Oh, I remember that.
Ugh. I thought it was such a nice idea, but the wire mesh that I bought was too flimsy and it just looked really bad. So put up a regular, perfectly nice dog ear 6-foot fence. And then the back of the duplex property is the adjacent property is a community garden, which unfortunately has kind of just been left to turn into jungle.
It has gone to seed, as we say in gardener's land.
Yes, that sounds much better. As far as I understand, there is an effort to revive the community garden. But in the meantime, it's separated by a 8-foot tall chain link fence. And the situation is the same at the cottage. So I clad over the chain link fence. So basically we attached horizontal rails to the vertical metal posts and then nailed onto those. So now there's an 8-foot picket fence at the back of the duplex, which I put up all by myself, every single picket. It only occurred to me about halfway through that like I could just put them all up and then run a circular saw across the top of the whole thing to get a level, line. Yeah. But of course I cut each picket individually, which actually might have been good because it allowed me to do some really weird cuts around like stumps and stuff that are just kind of there. But anyway, all of that was really good. The new tenants are super happy. They're actually like using and enjoying the backyard. So it makes me feel really good to like make it nicer for them. And then I did a truly radical thing that is the way that I know that I'm getting older.
Cry me a river, man. Go ahead.
No, I think it's a good thing. I hired a lawn care company who they're not going to do, like, I'll still do the mowing, but they're going to I don't want to hear it about chemicals and things. I'm just not interested. Like, they are going to turn this grass into a green carpet, and that is all I want.
As far as you're concerned, no chemicals will be used. They'll just work some sort of magic. Just some sort of magic will make this. Yeah.
Yes. So, I felt like, okay, first of all, this is like a sign of great maturity and growth. And second of all, it really will be nice because like it's only been about 2 years since I bought that thing. And the backyard at the time was like just trash, folding tables that had like broken down over time. Half the lawn was covered in rugs, like living room rugs, like not indoor, outdoor rugs, just rugs. So they all kind of like fell apart while I was lifting it. It was disgusting. It was so bad. And then I did all this construction. So essentially the ground it is beyond what I'm willing to do to try to establish a nice lawn. And so this is a throw money at the problem situation that I'm so happy about.
Sounds like you did the right thing.
I'm so excited. I hope it's great. Meanwhile, my own lawn is not nice.
And before anybody gets too upset, well, I can't speak to the chemicals. I must stay out of that one. But I will say that in both your area and mine, we get a ton of rain. So it's not like you're going to be out there watering your lawn a whole bunch.
Oh, yeah.
I think people forget that, and I don't ever water my lawn. I don't even water my garden. I get so much rain.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I almost, unless we're going through a really bad dry snap. We've talked about this. We just sort of survival of the fittest. But
yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, our garden methods.
Unless you have everything planted out, which is a big backyard. It's not just going to be like a garden. You either have weeds or grass or dirt, and I will take the grass. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we do need to take a break, but listener Q&A is up next. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by The Window Course. The Window Course, created by Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog, is a step-by-step do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It's self-paced, so you can go fast or as slow as you need, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget.
Now that we're headed into the warmer months, Stacy, you know what that means. It's window season.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the perfect time to get ready to restore your windows at your house. And the Window Course has all of the information you need all in one place.
Scott is offering his students a special deal. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the training package, then you'll get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $100 value.
As if that wasn't enough, the Window Course is also offered with a money-back guarantee, and Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales.
True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells. All of Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island, with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, which is native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone.
I tell you all the time, Stacy, unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood, so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, which makes it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills.
When I see other people using Sutherland Wells products on Instagram, it makes me happy because I know how great they are. I've used Murdoch's, I've used Clarabelle's, I've used their wood polish, I've used Slicky Wicky. Everything I try, I love. And whatever you're working on, it might be siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it, Sutherland Wells has a product for that.
To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, SutherlandWells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TrueTales.
We're back.
We're back. Do we have a Q&A?
We're still working our way through just a couple more questions that came in last season. And the question this week is about an unusual ceiling situation. And it comes from Carrie. Carrie says, our 1905 home has a canvas ceiling in one room. We can press up on it and feel what I assume is plaster about 1 to 2 inches above. And then she asked, can you share some history about these ceilings? Ours has the paint peeling off. Is it worth it to try to restore, or should we tear it down and try to work with whatever is underneath? Okay, I have to admit that I sat on this question actually most of last season. It just wasn't something that I could answer right off the top of my head. And I wasn't even sure who to ask at the time. However, after my interview with Brooke a couple weeks ago, she's our guest today, the architectural conservator. She specializes in paint. I realized I can ask Brooke. So she proved to be just the resource that we needed to solve at least maybe part of this mystery. I reached out to her by email, and I'm going to read her response to everyone. Carrie, hopefully you're listening. You'll hear this. Brooke wrote, during the early 20th century and up to the 1940s, people would apply canvas over plaster as a budget way to repair it. And she said that she sees this a lot in her work in Depression era interventions, people who are trying to fix things during the Depression era. She said it easily covers up cracks, and then they would paint it without having to knock the plaster out and recoat. However, Brooke had a little more to say about this. She said, if there's canvas, that usually means that there's a problem being covered up. She said it is strange that there's a 1 to 2 inch cavity between the canvas and the plaster, as Carrie describes, because canvas is usually affixed right to the plaster without a gap. So Carrie, she said that if you're feeling any crashing or debris up above that you should probably remove that canvas and then put a new ceiling in where it's damaged. Those were just her thoughts. Now, when I wrote to Brooke and asked her about this, and I realized, Carrie, that I have no idea whether this was a decorative painted ceiling that you were describing or just a straight up painted ceiling. So Brooke did elaborate that sometimes they did use muslin in lieu of canvas, and she brought up the Clara Barton house in Maryland as a good example of that. But she wanted me to tell you that, Carrie, if you want to send her some photos, then she will take a look. So reach out to me through the contact form or through social media, and I will connect you and Brooke together, and she can further help you with this mystery. And Daniel, I'm wondering, does this track with how you might have answered this question too?
Pretty much. Brooke, you really stole my opportunity to shine. I guess I would add a couple things. Number one, the cavity to me sounds like it's probably just a result of the adhesive on that canvas or muslin failing. Like Brooke mentioned, it could be muslin, it could be canvas. Muslin was a little more common, as far as I understand, for basically prepping plaster walls for wallpaper because it provided a very nice smooth surface. And it's a little bit absorbent, so it would absorb the wallpaper paste nicely and just give you a nice smooth finish. So that was a really typical thing. I know in like Texas and places where shiplap walls are common, it was often applied over shiplap to accept wallpaper finishes and other things. In terms of what to do with it, I think Brooke is totally right. It was often put up to cover some damage, even if it wasn't at the time. There's probably some damage now. And one thing to just bear in mind, canvas and muslin are highly flammable. So it's probably definitely best to remove it. And if the plaster above is salvageable, there are new products that are basically going to do the same thing, but better. So there's one called Fibafuse that is...
We talked about that on a different episode.
Yeah, we talked about it a while ago. I've now used it. It works great. You can also use like fiberglass window...
mesh tape?
Yeah, fiberglass mesh tape or window screening. I know Alex at Old Townhome, who's been on the show a bunch of times, he prefers that to embed in a layer of skim coating. So yeah, lots and lots of good resources out there on how to save what's remaining of the plaster. If it's in super poor condition, tear it out, have a nice sheetrock ceiling, enjoy your life.
And Carrie, when you find out what's behind there, please follow up and let us know.
Yes. I like this mystery.
I do too. And thank you so much for that question. That was really cool. If anyone else has a question for us to answer on an upcoming episode, go to truetalesfromoldhouses.com and click on the contact link to submit your question. And of course, you can also leave your question via voicemail. We're hitting that suggestion really hard during this episode. There is a mic icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the website. Click on that and just follow the prompts.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
All right, Daniel, it's time for another quick break, but more excellent information from Brooke is coming right up. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Abitron.
Stacy, you and I love our big old wooden houses, but we cannot talk about them without eventually acknowledging the challenges of rotted and damaged wood. Windows, doors, columns, balusters, any other wooden features will eventually break down if exposed to the elements for long enough.
And Abitron products can help. For years, I have turned to Abitron's liquid wood and wood epox to make durable, cost-effective repairs on my own wooden doors, the windows, columns, you said it. The system consists of 2 products, an epoxy wood hardener.
That's the liquid wood.
And a lightweight epoxy wood filler.
That's the wood epox.
And those 2 products, the liquid wood and wood epox, effectively harden soft wood. You can use them to patch pieces that are missing altogether, or both.
So I came to Abitron after many years of experimenting with lesser wood fillers, and I experienced firsthand how quickly those repairs have failed over time. I really love Abitron because there's no shrinking or cracking. It sands and paints just like wood, and the repairs will probably last longer than the house.
Visit Abitron.com for all of the product information and to order directly. And available exclusively to True Tales from Old Houses listeners, Abitron is offering a 10% discount if you use the coupon code TRUE2024. So enter TRUE2024 at abitron.com and save those existing wood features instead of replacing them.
True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Noonan Heritage Craftworks.
You may know Joseph Parenti from Instagram for his work with historic exteriors in the Pittsburgh area. Well, he is now extending his offerings to homeowners across the United States with Noonan Heritage Craftworks.
Finding the right help to restore and maintain your old house can be super challenging. Where do you start? What materials and methods should you use? And who can you trust?
Those are all common questions. You can schedule a phone call, a video conference, or email consultation with Joseph to talk through your exterior project and help you game plan. So whether you need to prepare a scope of work or you need a second set of eyes to help compare estimates, maybe figure out questions to ask vendors, Joseph can provide unbiased guidance to help you steer clear of pitfalls and ensure success.
To learn how Noonan Heritage Craftworks can work with you, visit our special landing page at Noonan Craftworks. That's Noonan, noonancraftworks.com/truetales.
Our guest today is Brooke Young Russell. I have wanted to learn about architectural conservation for a very long time. And let me tell you, Brooke knows her stuff. And I did this interview by myself because you were unable to be there, Daniel.
Yeah, I couldn't join this one, unfortunately, because it's a really good interview. So great job, Stacy, and enjoy.
My name is Brooke Young Russell, and I am an senior architectural conservator or senior conservator with Evergreene Architectural Arts, and I work out of the DC metro area.
Hi, Brooke. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm pleased. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
I have wanted to have an architectural conservator on the show for a long time because I think that what you do is so interesting. And I also think that not everybody knows what you do. So I'm wondering if you would start with, I guess, a job description as such.
You know, it's really interesting because there's a divide between, in a way, what an art conservator may do and what an architectural conservator may do. So I can work on art, but art conservators, they're the people who work in museums, or they do private practice and they work on objects, archaeology, ethnographic materials, and all the gamut. And then I work at a large scale. So the difference is that I have to work within the built environment. I don't get to work in a hermetic environment like many art conservators do. They get to work in laboratories. They're not interfacing with the public, asking them where the bathroom is. They're not dealing with plumbers and demolition guys and HVAC guys and electricians, So there's a little bit of a battle on job sites. You have to be very good with boundaries and communication and working with GCs who don't understand. Like, you're kind of starting at a deficit a lot of times because budget, money, et cetera, schedule, it's all tied together. And so when I'm working on an active construction site, I'm trying to save materials that other people just kind of want to get out of there. They're frustrated. They don't understand it. They don't understand why it's being saved. But usually by a week of me on site, I get everybody very excited and sort of change their tune about that. But my specific materials are interior materials, so paint and plaster, wood finishes, things that tend to be more ephemeral.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Now that we know what you do, why would someone call you? So give me an example of why someone would say, Brooke, we need you to come here and do this.
So recently I got a phone call, or my company got a phone call, because they removed a drop ceiling and they found an 1888 painted decorated ceiling with a bunch of flowers and stenciling in a very, very iconic building in California. And a lot of times people look at this and they know that this should be saved. They know that this is a unique situation, but they don't know how to approach it. So typically we get called on site when that sort of schedule panic happens and, oh my gosh, what do we do? And so I'll come on site and perform, documentation, surveys, trying to understand not just the painted surface, for example, but also the substrate and how is the substrate attached to the base building. And so you're looking at everything constantly switching from macro to micro. And you're looking at the system, looking at the building system as a whole. So what's going on the floor above? Are there vibrational activities? Particularly when you're dealing with things like plaster and wood that are very susceptible to, they're not very flexible, right? Wood's more flexible than plaster, but you're not going to if plaster's not going to bend easily.
Sure.
Yeah. And then another time is when we're working in a public building. We do a lot of work in theaters and courthouses and state capitals. I think we've done almost every single state capital in the 40 years that the company I work for has been around. And there's a lot of historic documentation. People look back at that and they say, oh, it looks like there was some decorative paint, looks like there was some stenciling, or there may have been a mural. Can we find it? And so my job is to do kind of like treasure hunting and using archival images as well as, on-site investigative techniques to see, is it still there? And if it's not still there, can we replicate it? How would we replicate it? And kind of taking it from there.
Okay. When you put the question out there, can it be replicated? Are you telling them how to replicate it? Or are you just saying, this is what's here, and then it turns over to a different department? Or you have the plans laid out for them to replicate it?
The one thing that's very unique about the company I work for, and I'm not trying to do a sales pitch, but it is the company I work for, Evergreen, is very, very unique in that we are a soup to nuts company. So we have the largest, I think, among the architectural conservation, but most architectural conservators, I think 99% of architectural conservators are in private practice. We have the largest staff. So we're working on, like, mine is paint investigations, right? Okay. And then we have people who work on sculptures. We have people who work on exterior masonry. I mean, we really just have every material kind of covered. So when you come to that, we also have a full-blown design studio in New York with trained artists who can replicate things. Like, we did a really amazing project at the Missouri Botanical Gardens where we found an 1860s ceiling, but it had degraded to the point that it was no longer safe. It was a life safety issue, which is also kind of where we butt heads with art conservators, because art conservators are like, you save it at all costs, like preventive, like da 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 da. And it's like, well, no, because this is a real building, and like we can't have degraded plaster falling on people's heads, because that's not good.
It's frowned upon.
So it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, not safe. So we will go in and do the best that we can. And so we carefully removed the ceiling and sent actual portions of the ceiling to our New York studio, where they were able to look at the materials and recreate the ceiling, but it was applied via a canvas that had been hand painted in New York. So we try to make it so that it's not cost prohibitive, because the artwork, at the end of the day, the original atmosphere of the interior is the most important part. And then, we can save certain other aspects and then kind of glue back some of the pieces, and they can put it on a wall and say, okay, this is what was here originally. And obviously we have like photogrammetry and do full blown documentation of the ceiling. So, sometimes we have to, as a conservator, I have to compromise the do no harm for large scale issues, that this is a living, breathing building and it needs to remain as such. And so sometimes we do have to remove historic fabric invasively.
When you were describing that, I was thinking compromise. There's a lot of compromise in your work, or maybe not a lot, but there is at least some compromise. We have this perfect idea in our heads of what conservation might be. But then, like you said, there's the reality. People are coming in and out of this building. It's not a museum display behind plexiglass where no one will ever get hurt if they walk in.
No. And also, like, the reason why someone might bring us in as well is that we can come up with means and methods to preserve historic fabric, even if we have to apply new material on top, so that in the future, because obviously this is a field that's scientifically based, it's academic, and it's constantly evolving. And so we want to make sure that going forward, anything that we do, if it can be reversed, to make it reversible, and how we can facilitate that. Sometimes that's just not possible, but we try.
Right.
But it is a lot of negotiating.
I am fascinated by this idea of canvas on the ceiling, and just think that's so smart. I would not have thought about that, but what a perfect compromise. Yeah. The canvas helps keep all that old plaster in place. Sure.
Well, so for example, I don't know if you've seen the show Yellowstone, right? But that is where they say that's the Montana state capitol in that show. That's actually the Wyoming state capitol. And we redid all of the finishes. So there's this amazing picture of a former conservator worked with us, Brian Fick, and he did this like ginormous paint reveal, which is when we use various methods, to either mechanical or chemical methods, to remove layer by layer down to show what was there originally. And he found the original stenciling, I guess that, I can't remember when the state capitol was built, but probably in the late 19th century. And is exceptionally ornate. And so we had enough information that we were able to bring on for a 3 or 4 year project to replicate all of the original decoration. And at the same time, so we did up at the top where people aren't really going to be seeing it. It's like hard to get to. We did canvas. And then, where the viewer's eyes are, basically at eye level is all hand painted. And when you watch Yellowstone, like, you can't tell the difference between the canvas because we did it so high up, and I thought that was a really interesting collaboration between the New York studio and then our incredible field workers who travel full time for Evergreen and work in all these crazy places. Yeah.
This is kind of blowing my mind because when I first thought, oh, I'll reach out to Brooke and see if she wants to be on the show, I was purely thinking about this from the standpoint of taking samples of the layers of paint. That's what I've been most familiar with. But all the rest of this is just, like I said, it's blowing my mind.
It's huge.
It's huge. And I love it. This is wonderful. Can you describe the process of looking through layers of paint? Since didn't you say that you primarily work with paint conservation?
Yeah, that's really my specialty. I fell in love with paint, thought I was going to be a paintings conservator, and I couldn't get into grad school. Because it's very, very hard to get into grad school. Those programs are extremely challenging and there's a lot of requirements, and sort of one of those moments where it's like when you get fired from a job and you're like, oh, that saved me. Because then I did a Google search and, Columbia University has a program in architectural conservation. I'm like, well, I love architecture. I grew up in a historic preservation household. My father studied art history. Yale, I studied art history undergrad. So it was like just a natural course for me to go into architecture. I'm like, oh, I can merge the two. So what I started doing is when I went to Columbia, I knew what I wanted to do. I was really lucky. So I was able to target a lot of my courses and my thesis specifically around paint investigation. So there's a lot of it is an invasive process. And this is something that I always tell people, like, I'm going to cut into your building. It's small. I mean, we do not take the teeny tiny samples that paintings conservators take, like when they're sampling from a Monet, for example, or a Manet. I can get a pretty hefty sample, and a lot of times we have to, but I really try to do the paint reveals and the paint sampling at the same time because they work together. There's a lot of things that you can miss when you're looking at something in cross section that you can reveal, top down. So it really should be like a hand in hand process, but sometimes that's just not possible, right? Because that's obviously more money. So a lot of it is just like gaining tons of experience and reading lots of articles and keeping in touch with other conservators who specialize in that. It's a very supportive community. It's not cutthroat. So like I could call up people who I look up to who have mentored me and say, like, I'm coming across this. I'm not really sure what this is. And we'll all kind of get together and talk about it. And it's just a really beautiful community. Whereas a lot of time in academia and science, it's like, oh, I'm not going to tell you.
Right.
Figure it out on your own. Like, that's my money. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's what I get paid to do. It's really wonderful. But yeah, so I go in and I take the paint samples and then cast them in resin and polish them and then look at them in cross section and then do the color matching, never to the ones in resin though. You have to take two samples. You have to have one that is in resin to look at in cross section and under UV light. And then you also kind of dig at a sample underneath the microscope top down. So you're doing sort of small scale reveals underneath the microscope. And that's how that's done.
So these samples, do they look sort of like the core sample in a tree? Or is this like a 2x2 square? Or how does this work?
Okay, so there's different methods to extract the samples, right? So if it's a soft plaster, maybe I'll use a 5/8 inch steel punch, right? If it's like a nice hefty ceiling or it's a flat ceiling or whatever, or I know I'm going to be taking from an area where there's a stencil because you can sometimes see stencils radioing through in raking light, which is really cool. Like that is fun when that happens.
What does that mean? I don't know what that term means.
Sure. So, okay. So let's say you have like a decorative scheme, right? And there's going to be layers on top of layers, like how it's applied. So you're going to have a base paint and then you're going to have a stencil that's going to be applied on top. So you're always going to have a little bit of a doubled surface on there. Like it's always going to look a little bit like opposite of embossing. My brain's dead right now.
I know
can't
what you
think
mean.
of good
Yeah,
words.
exactly.
But you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, right. And so what's going to happen? You're going to put paint layers on top of that. Right. And you're always going to see a little bit of a bump there where the, let's say an acanthus leaf stencil was applied. Okay. So what happens is this thing, you take a flashlight and you put it so that the light falls across the surface, not on the surface
Right.
direct, but a raking light goes across the surface. So then what's going to happen is it's going to show that differentiation between it's utterly flat and the bumps where the stencil's popping up.
Right.
And it's very subtle. But what's really cool is when there's several iterations of stenciling on top of one another. And it's like, sort of like, remember when we used to listen to the radio and you go out in the middle of nowhere and then 3 radio stations would come in through the same channel at once?
Right.
Yeah. So that's what it's kind of like when you see it. And I've had that happen in some older churches where they just kept up the decorative paint.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. But it's really confusing when you start revealing. And that's where the microscopy can come and be really supportive, because when you look at the microscopy, you can actually see the dirt layers. And based on the level of soiling because painters never wipe down the surface ever. So when you see the surface soiling, the amount of that will tell you, okay, that was presenting on the surface for a pretty long time, enough so they accumulate that level of dirt. So I know that this campaign is different from the campaign on top, and you can sort of start to untangle what is from where. And also looking at historic pattern books for stenciling and understanding what the designs were at that time.
Right. So we talked about taking sort of a hole punch sample, but what other kind of sample? If you're taking something by layers, what size of a sample would you take and how would that work?
So a hole punch sample, like 5/8 inch. And then sometimes I just do a scalpel. I'll take like a size 10, sometimes a size 15 if I need to get a really small sample. And I'll just kind of do it, like carve into it so that you kind of get a little bit of a tornado shaped funnel type surface so that, the substrate sort of narrows down, but you always want to capture the substrate, because that way, if you don't, then you don't know if you've gotten the first layers or not. And let me tell you something, it always cleaves, like, especially if there's gilding, or a lot of times we have incompatible paint layers, like distemper paints or lime washes were really, really popular. And if they didn't clean those off the surface, which thank God most times they don't, and then they slap an oil layer on, or a alkyd or acrylic latex on top, which is, that's what we have. So what are you going to do? It just pops off. The post-historic labels pop off. There's no adhesion between those. Or if there's a dirt layer there, it's like putting tape on a dusty surface. It doesn't stick.
Sure. Okay. Well, this is so fascinating. I know that was kind of technical, but I have a feeling that people who are listening also were curious about how are these samples taken, because we aren't doing the job that you're doing. So it's all very, very new to me, and probably new to a lot of the listeners too. So I have a few other questions, I guess. And I'm wondering, how are historic preservation and architectural conservation different?
They are different. So that's an excellent question. So I have the same degree. Architectural conservators oftentimes will get I have a master's in the science historic preservation. I went through architecture school, but there are a few programs in the United States that are geared towards materials science and understanding the materials, building materials. And that's Columbia University. There's also an excellent program at University of Pennsylvania. SCAD used to have a great program, Savannah College of Art and Design. UT Austin also used to have a great program. I'm not really sure where those programs are right now with it. Clemson University. So there are some great schools out there where you can focus on materials. So I don't do policy because I don't know how to do any of that stuff. That was not my focus. You get a basic, like your first year, you get all the basics of historic preservation. But the most important thing that I learned in grad school, outside of just understanding the materials themselves and the materials science, was also researching and how to perform archival research and writing. That is one thing that's different. So I guess the divide, if I'm keeping it simple, sorry, made that too long, would be historic preservationists are policy, and they're looking at things like very overall, right? And I'm looking at things at a very, very small level, like teeny infinitesimal level. And so we work collaboratively. I work with a lot of preservation architects, and, preservation architects, they really know their stuff. They know materials too, but that's just not their focus, and it doesn't need to be their focus.
So my next question would be, does architectural conservation follow the designation of historic? And by that, I mean that now that, 1970s buildings are 50 years or older, and they fulfill the requirements of being historic. Is your work focused now on properties from that time period?
Gosh, you have really good questions. Yes, absolutely. In fact, in order to prevent sort of a lapse in caretaking and addressing those postmodern materials, so for example, brutalist buildings, there's this wonderful, I like brutalist buildings. I grew up in Baltimore. It's a lot of brutalism in Baltimore. And Dalle de Verre, which is sort of like you see those really beautiful mid-century stained glass, that's kind of like shards stuck in like a cementitious
Yes.
material. It's not, yes, but you can date a building immediately on that. Those materials have to be looked at because once you hit post World War II, all the materials got really wackadoodle and they weren't using traditional building materials. Everything became modified. Like, for example, we did a mortar analysis of a government building in DC, and you do this thing called acid digestion, and it's basically so you can get the sand out of the lime, so you can see what colored sand they use. So you color match the sand and you get the aggregate sizes and stuff. So you can duplicate the mortar perfectly. Sure. So it looks on the outside of the building the same, more or less. That's the idea. Okay. I don't know what they put into this mortar in the 1930s, but they swore up and down that this was a historic mortar. And this weird jelly came out of it. It looked like yellowy green jelly. And then this brown goo. Oh, it was disgusting. And then this brown like sludge, which we left out and it ended up hardening. And they were modifiers. They were plasticizers that were added, we think. And this is not, mortar analysis and petrography is like a whole other field. Like you study to be a petrographer. Like that is not even anything I would feign to know about. But we were getting all this stuff and we're like, what is this? There is a whole new generation of materials that have to modern paints. We're just starting to look at those. Every company had their own recipe because every company in the early and mid 20th century hired their own chemists to come up so they could one up their competition. Sherwin-Williams had their own chemists working for them. Then it would the paint wouldn't work. So then they would have to one up it again. So, 1932 to 1933 could have a completely different paint recipes. It's just insane. And so we don't know what was in those materials. So we're just starting to look at them. Concrete science. There's a huge conference called World of Concrete that happens every single year.
I love this.
In Las Vegas. I know. And I'm telling you, it is just a total geek fest. And people love it because concrete science, even to this day, is not completely understood.
Right. It's been
I
around.
didn't bother with it for thousands of years.
Yeah. Concrete in some form has been around. Yeah. For thousands of years. So, wow. That's the world of concrete. I'm going to have to put that on my schedule. That sounds interesting.
You've got to go. And the swag is amazing.
It sounds heavy though.
But it's enormous.
Sorry. That was a bad joke.
No, it was a good dad joke though.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few dad jokes up my sleeve after being a parent for so long. All right. So we kind of touched on this, but I guess I'd like to have some additional information about what do individuals and organizations do with the data you provide. So I'm sure you hand them a nice thick stack of information and say, here you go. And what do they do with that?
Oftentimes, they turn into jobs for us years down the line. Sometimes what we'll do is I will perform like a really large paint reveals, particularly in churches that are, because churches are not doing well right now. And their congregation can get an idea of what is under that, the layers and layers of paint. And then we'll provide that information. They can do some fundraising around that. So we did some work at a university in DC where I think 6 years ago, we had done a paint study and they wanted to update the room. There were some complicated historical figures that had been inscribed on the walls before we entered our modern age, and those people were no longer appropriate to pay homage to. So, the student body really wanted to change out and put some more appropriate people on the walls. They're more representative of the university at this day and age and going forward. And so they had us kind of do an integration of newer designs, but at the same time, like taking our old paint study and saying, okay, so we know what color this is supposed to be. We know that what this is supposed to look like. And then they will use that data and either replicate or take it back. We have a lot of treatments, like for murals, we'll do testing. So we'll come up with a methodology particularly if it's a large job, so they can put it out to bid, and then the reports will go into the request for proposals or any bid documents. And so that work has already been done. And so then people can see if they really can do the work, if they're interested in doing it, they can take on the work. So there's a lot of different ways. And a lot of times it's just archival,
Sure.
right?
So once you have provided this information for them, let's say they want to change the mural. What I hear you describing, or what I think you're saying, is that they can determine the colors to use, the type of, to change that mural, either paint new things on it that are more representative of, like you said, modern times moving forward, so that you don't have two distinct styles of painting. Is that
Correct.
what I'm understanding? Okay.
That is correct. So for example, when we did the work, the ceiling out in St. Louis, where we had to utterly replicate it from scratch, we looked at the substrate, we looked at the sanded gesso, or it was really, a sanded plaster. We looked at the aggregate size and then replicated that on canvas. So they sanded the gesso using same size greens. So that way, when they painted on it, and then they studied the artist's hand, because there's a lot of different styles. And when you are replicating, you really have to push aside your own artistic ego, because you're not putting yourself into, I mean, you're always going to put a little bit of yourself into the artwork, but that can't be the intention. You're trying to honor what was there. And so in order to replicate, you kind of step outside of yourself the entire time. It's exhausting, but it's feasible. Yeah.
It's like being a ghost painter instead of the actual
Absolutely.
painter. Yes. Yeah. Like a ghost writer, ghost painter.
That's an excellent analogy. That's exactly what it's like.
We have just a few more minutes together, which I can't believe it has gone by so fast. But I'm curious, are you ever stumped by your findings? Do they ever lead to a dead end?
Oh, 100%. 100%. There's a lot of times where I'll look at something and I'm just like, this really, really, really doesn't make sense. This really, really is not adding up. This is so hard. And of course, that happened on one of our, the country's most prestigious building. I worked at the US Capitol, and I couldn't figure this out. And a previous conservative, more experienced than me, had done, actually, a couple of them had done some really amazing paint studies in the same space. And I think that's, a lot of times, what is that? What's it? The razor? It's sort of like the simplest explanation is the explanation.
Oh, Occam's razor.
Occam's razor. And I have a tendency to overcomplicate things.
You think zebras instead of horses.
Right, exactly.
What it is? If you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
Yes, precisely. And that's also a conservator's mindset, because we get so invested into the micro level. And so that's when I have to really take a step back. So then maybe I'll talk to some of our craftspeople and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Is that make any sense to you? And most times it doesn't. Most times it's like, no, that's not what they did. So I think it's like, that's when you want to bring in and collaborate with other knowledgeable people, because they're going to be looking at it from a fresher perspective. But yeah, I mean, oh my gosh. And I tell people, I'm like, paint investigation is a pseudoscience, because I'm looking at something and it's completely subjective. Like, I could see, maybe if I'm looking at gilding and cross section, I could see like a Dutch metal leaf. And then my colleague could be like, no, I think that's paint. And I'm like, no, it's leaf. And so, because it's really hard to tell sometimes, and, other times it's like, oh, that's not first generation, that's second generation, look at this. And so that's when you have to really take a step back and start to look at all of the data holistically. Color changes, paints, one side of the room could be one shade deeper than the other side of the room because the paint degraded differently, or, so you have to, like, that's where your experience comes in. You're like, okay, if the color matching and they're one value off and maybe one hue saturation deeper, it's the same color. It's just, when you're dealing with hand mixed paints, there's going to be variation. And then you look at tolerances. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so much to know. So scientific. You're saying subjective, which I get. I totally get that. But also you have to draw your conclusions through very scientific methods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Step by step. And remove your ego from it, which is impossible. I get so upset with myself sometimes. I'm like,
what makes you upset? Because you want to understand something that you don't, or you...
Yes.
Okay.
And feeling like a failure. Like, have I failed this building? Right? Because what I'm putting on the surface, what I'm recommending to be put on the surface is going to be put on the surface. So there's a lot of pressure on me. And I've definitely recommended treatments that have failed. and we had to go back and fix. And it kind of kicks your butt every single day because you can't, the minute you start saying, I know what I know, then you might as well just stop because you never know what you know. You don't know what you know. So there's a lot of second guessing, but there's also like, okay, but sometimes you have to overcome that anxiety and just, you have to move forward and take a leap. But that's again why I work with the best people because they all are supportive and they are all like, okay, well, like, let's try this or let's do this. And so that's really helpful as well. So I'm not ever alone.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's wonderful. So before we finish up today, I'm wondering, can people hire you? And if so, how? I mean, should we send them somewhere in the show notes so that they could reach out to you if they have a project?
Oh, I would love that. So we have a full-blown, developed business development department. But if anybody has any questions about conservation concerns, they can email me at brussell@evergreen.com. And that's 2 S's, 2 L's, and then evergreen, like the tree, but it has an E on the end. Or they can head over to our website to view some of our, I think all of our projects are on the website. You just have to do a search at evergreen.com. And I'm always more than happy to talk to people. And if the project's, maybe not right for us, I'm happy to recommend some solid colleagues as well. There's never anything project too small. You never know. So don't let that be a deterrent.
Thank you so much for being here today, Brooke, and shedding a lot of light on this topic, which I knew just a very tiny little fraction of.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you.
Oh, this has been great. And so thank you. I look forward to finding out more and going to your company website and looking at all your projects.
Thank you. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to our guest today, Brooke Young Russell.
If you loved this episode, which how could you not, please let us know. Drop us an email, leave us a voicemail, and please consider leaving a rating or review wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts.
To continue the conversation, join us on Facebook and Instagram at True Tales from Old Houses. You can follow Daniel on Instagram at Daniel Cantor or myself at Blake Hill House.
And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's episode or request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com.
Until next time.
See you then.